Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something pretty interesting. It's about modern masculinity, especially how it plays out in dating and relationships these days. We're going to be looking at Conrad Rikers' book, The Relationship Quake, Dating in a Feminized World. It's got some really insightful stuff about the challenges and, the opportunities that men are facing in the dating world right now.
Yeah, one of the things that really grabbed my attention in this book is how it just goes right into these really sensitive topics. It's not afraid to tackle things head on, like
Yeah.
the impact of feminism on relationships or what Riker calls the feminization of society. He really digs deep into that stuff. Makes for a really interesting read.
Yeah, for sure. One of the first things he brings up is this double bind of vulnerability that a lot of men seem to be struggling with. Like, how do you balance being strong but also emotionally open? How does Riker unpack this, especially when it comes to dating?
He basically says that men are in this no-win situation. Society tells them to be in touch with their emotions, to be vulnerable, but then, traditional masculinity says vulnerability is weakness. So it's like a catch-22, especially in dating. Women say they want a sensitive man, but also someone who's confident and strong.
So it's not just about being vulnerable, but being vulnerable in the right way, I guess.
Exactly. Raker calls it strategic vulnerability. He says, be genuine, be in touch with your feelings, but think about when and how you express them. Like imagine you're on a date and you're talking about travel, right? Instead of just listing places you've been, you could share a story about a time you felt vulnerable while traveling.
Ah, I see.
Like maybe you got lost or had to overcome some obstacle. It lets you connect on a deeper level while still showing your strength.
That's really interesting. So it's not about hiding your vulnerability. It's more like using it in a way that builds a genuine connection. Now, this idea of the feminization of society that the book digs into. I'm curious to hear how Riker approaches this. I mean, some people might hear that and immediately get defensive.
Right, right. Well, Riker kind of looks at it from a historical point of view. He argues that the rise of feminism and the push for gender equality, all that, has led to a decline in traditional gender roles. He definitely sees the good that's come from that, but he also suggests it's brought some new challenges for men, especially figuring out their place in society and in relationships.
So it's not like he's saying that striving for gender equality is a bad thing, but that it's created a kind of cultural earthquake that men are still adjusting to.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's like those traditional roles and expectations for men are kind of blurred now. Like he points to the rise of the strong, independent woman, which is awesome, of course, but it can also lead to some confusion for men. They might feel unsure about how to relate to these women or, where they fit into this new dynamic.
Makes sense. It's like the rules of the game have changed, but not everyone got the memo. What are some of the consequences Riker sees from this shift, especially in the dating world?
One thing he talks about is this rise of what he calls toxic masculinity. He says this concept, while important for calling out harmful behavior, can sometimes be used too broadly. And that creates this atmosphere where traditional masculine traits are just seen as suspicious. It makes dating pretty tricky for guys who are trying to figure out what's expected of them.
So on the one hand, men are told to embrace their sensitive side, but on the other, they're warned against being too traditionally masculine.
Yeah,
Seems like a
yeah.
tough spot to be in.
It is. But Riker actually offers some pretty solid advice for men on how to handle this. He says, understanding female dating strategies is key. Be upfront about your intentions and set clear boundaries. Basically, be proactive in your dating life. Don't just sit around and wait for things to happen.
That seems like a good point to transition into this red pill philosophy. For those who haven't heard of it, it's all about self-improvement for men and understanding female behavior, especially in dating. But it's gotten some heat for being misogynistic. How does Riker handle this potentially controversial topic?
Well, he definitely acknowledges the controversy, the potential for misogynistic interpretations. But he also thinks there's valuable stuff in there, particularly about understanding female psychology and how dating dynamics really work. But he's cautious, too. He warns against using red pill ideas to develop resentment towards women. He says it should be about personal growth, not manipulation.
So using this knowledge to better yourself, not to exploit others.
Exactly. It's all about approaching dating and relationships with honesty and integrity.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about male mental health, something that's been getting more attention, but still not enough. Riker drops a pretty alarming stat. 78% of men have considered suicide at least once. Why does he think this is such a hidden struggle for so many men?
He says it comes down to societal pressure. Men are expected to keep their emotions bottled up, to always appear strong no matter what they're going through inside. It creates this environment where they feel like they can't talk about their problems or ask for help when they need it. That leads to isolation and, despair.
He actually tells a story about John, this successful executive who seems to have it all, but secretly he's battling severe depression. It really shows how this pressure to appear strong can prevent men from getting the support they need.
For sure. And the book also gets into the stigma around men seeking help for mental health issues. Riker encourages guys to break free from those stereotypes and prioritize their well-being. He's very clear that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
That's a powerful message. It's okay to not be okay, and reaching out for help is so important. Now, besides these internal struggles men face, Riker also talks about external challenges, like how a feminized workplace impacts men. What are some of the key points from that part of the book?
He suggests that the modern workplace, with its focus on things like collaboration and empathy, which are, traditionally seen as feminine, can be difficult for men who were raised with a more traditional idea of masculinity. It can lead to this feeling of being sidelined or misunderstood at work.
So it's not that these values are bad, but that there needs to be a balance.
Exactly. He talks about finding a way to bring those values together with traditional male strengths like assertiveness and decisiveness. He encourages men to think strategically about how they express their masculinity at work.
So find a way to assert yourself while still being respectful and collaborative.
Right. He also suggests finding mentors and allies in the workplace, people who can guide and support you as you navigate these changes.
That's a really important point. It's not about suppressing who you are, but finding a way to thrive in this new environment. And this probably connects to his discussion on self-care for men, right? What are some of Riker's recommendations in that area?
He's a big believer that self-care isn't weak. It's crucial for well-being. He encourages men to prioritize their physical and mental health, find healthy ways to deal with stress, and do things that bring them joy.
So it's not just about hitting the gym or meditating. It's about finding things that truly nourish your mind and spirit.
Exactly. Explore your passions, whether it's hobbies, creative stuff, spending time in nature. He says those things are essential for staying balanced and avoiding burnout.
Makes sense. It's about finding ways to recharge and reconnect with yourself.
He also talks about building strong relationships with other men. He thinks those friendships provide a kind of support and camaraderie that's really valuable for men's emotional health.
So finding your tribe, the guys who get you and who you can just be yourself around.
Absolutely. Those friendships can be a safe space for men to process their emotions, share experiences, and support each other.
That's a great point to end this part of our deep dive on. It's a reminder that we don't have to go through this alone. We'll be back in part 2 to dig deeper into some of these concepts and see how they play out in real life.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the relationship quake. Last time we were talking about the double bind of vulnerability and how those societal shifts are impacting men. So let's kind of pick up that thread. We touched on the feminization of society, and I wanted to dig into that a bit more, especially how it affects relationships.
Yeah, that phrase, feminization of society, can be a bit, well, loaded, right? Some people might hear it and think, oh no, that's a bad thing. I'm curious how Riker presents this. Like, what does he see as the downsides?
He's not saying feminine qualities are bad at all. Actually, he talks about a lot of positives that come with a more feminized society. But what he's getting at is the shift in gender roles. While it's been good in a lot of ways, it's also created some new challenges, especially when it comes to dating and relationships. He argues that for men, it's led to this kind of identity crisis. They're not sure what their role is anymore, what their purpose is in this new landscape.
So it's less about saying feminization is bad and more about, the growing pains of a society trying to figure out what it means to be masculine and feminine in this new world.
Exactly. Think about power dynamics in relationships. Riker argues that as women have become more financially independent, more successful in their careers and education, the traditional power balance has shifted.
Right. It used to be that men often held more power just because they were the primary breadwinners. But that's not always the case anymore.
Yeah, and while that's great for equality, Riker suggests it's also had some unintended consequences. For example, some men might feel, emasculated or threatened by a woman's success, and that can lead to resentment or insecurity in the relationship.
And on the other side, some women might have trouble finding men who are actually comfortable with their ambition and independence.
Absolutely, it goes both ways. Men and women are both figuring this out, and it can lead to a lot of misunderstandings and conflicts if they're not aware of these shifting dynamics.
So what's Riker's advice for men navigating this new dating world? Any practical tips?
He has a few. One big one is embracing radical authenticity. He wants men to be totally upfront about their intentions, their values, what they're looking for in a relationship.
Oh, no more games, no more pretending to be someone you're not.
Nope. He thinks that kind of honesty and transparency is the foundation for a healthy relationship. And of course, open communication and really listening to your partner.
That makes sense. Create a space where both people feel safe to express their needs and desires.
Exactly. He thinks clear communication can prevent a lot of those misunderstandings and build a much stronger foundation for the relationship.
Let's talk about the workplace for a bit. We touched on it last time, but I'd like to go a little deeper. How does Riker see this feminization of society affecting the work environment?
Well, he suggests that as workplaces become more focused on collaboration, empathy, emotional intelligence, all those things, some men might feel like the traditional masculine traits they were raised with, like assertiveness and competitiveness. Those things aren't valued anymore, or even worse, they're seen as negative.
Interesting. It's almost like there's this clash of cultures happening in the office.
Right. And that can lead to some men feeling frustrated or even alienated. They don't know how to fit in or succeed in this new environment.
So what's the solution? Should men just try to suppress those natural tendencies and conform to these new expectations?
Actually, he says the opposite. He wants men to embrace their unique strengths and find ways to express them effectively and respectfully.
So not becoming less masculine, but figuring out how to integrate those masculine traits with the values of the modern workplace.
Exactly. He uses assertiveness as an example. It can be a great asset at work, but it needs to be balanced with empathy and respect for others.
Finding that balance, right?
Right.
Not being a bully, but not being afraid to speak up or take charge when you need to.
Exactly. He also suggests finding mentors and allies at work, people who can offer guidance and support as you navigate these new dynamics.
Yeah, having that support network, those people you can trust and talk to, can be so helpful, especially when things get tough or you're feeling unsure.
Definitely. Now, something that I think is often overlooked, but that Riker really emphasizes, is the importance of hobbies and interests outside of work.
I'm intrigued. Why does he put so much emphasis on that?
Well, he believes that having passions and pursuits outside of work is really important for men to feel fulfilled, to feel like they have a purpose.
Uh-huh.
He says hobbies can provide an outlet for creativity, a sense of accomplishment, and a way to connect with others who share those interests.
So it's not just about having fun, it's about nurturing a part of yourself that might not get expressed in your work life.
Right. It's about doing things that you're passionate about, things that challenge you, that make you feel alive.
I like that. Having something that's just for you, something you're excited about, and that brings you satisfaction.
And he also points out that hobbies can be a great way for men to connect with other men, to build those friendships that we were talking about earlier.
Right. Those bonds are so important for men's emotional well-being.
Exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and forget to make time for those things that really matter, like spending time with friends and pursuing those passions.
Absolutely. And he's clear that making time for these things isn't selfish. It's actually crucial for avoiding burnout and maintaining a sense of balance in your life.
Now, before we move on, I wanted to touch on something that's a big part of everyone's life these days: technology. And Riker has some interesting thoughts on how it relates to masculinity.
Oh, that's a good one. We all grapple with that in some way. What's his take on it?
Well, he argues that this constant stream of images and information we see online, it can actually have a pretty negative impact on men's self-esteem and their sense of self.
That makes sense. It's like the internet can be great for connecting and learning, but it can also be a breeding ground for insecurity and these unrealistic expectations.
Exactly. He points to those idealized versions of masculinity that are everywhere on social media, the perfect bodies, the perfect lives. It can make men feel like they're not good enough, like they're failing somehow.
Yeah, and the constant comparison to other people's highlight reels. I think
Yeah.
we all fall into that trap sometimes.
For sure. So he encourages men to be really mindful of how much time they're spending on social media and to focus on building a sense of self-worth that comes from within, not from external validation.
About being selective with what you consume online and
Mhm.
making sure it's not negatively impacting your self-esteem.
Exactly. Remember, the internet is just a tool. You decide how you use it. It can be a source of connection and creativity, or it can be a way to numb yourself and feed your insecurities.
It's about being intentional and taking control of your online experience rather than letting it control you.
He also talks about how important it is to have those real-world connections and experiences, spending time in nature, having face-to-face interactions, building those meaningful relationships. Those things help keep you grounded in a world that's increasingly dominated by technology.
A good reminder to step away from the screen sometimes and engage with the world around you.
Now, speaking of real-world experiences, Riker spends a good chunk of the book talking about fatherhood, the challenges and rewards of being a dad in today's world.
That's something I'm really interested in. How does he tie fatherhood into all these societal shifts we've been discussing?
Well, he argues that fathers have a vital role to play in shaping the next generation of men.
Okay.
He believes they have a responsibility to model healthy masculinity for their sons, to teach them about respect, responsibility, resilience, and to be there for them emotionally as they navigate the complexities of growing up.
So it sounds like he's advocating for a more involved, emotionally present style of fatherhood, more than just the traditional provider and disciplinarian.
Exactly. He wants fathers to be actively engaged in their kids' lives, to listen to them, validate their feelings, and give them that unconditional love and support.
It's about being a role model, not just in what you say, but in what you do.
And he also talks about the importance of fathers teaching their sons about relationships, both with women and other men.
Right. That's crucial, especially today when there's so much confusion about relationships.
He thinks fathers can really help their sons develop healthy relationship skills and teach them how to be respectful, supportive partners. And it's not just about sons. He talks about daughters, too. Fathers play a vital role in helping their daughters develop a healthy sense of self-worth and forming positive relationships with men.
That's so important.
Yeah.
Fathers really can shape their daughters' perceptions of men and help them build healthy relationship patterns.
Absolutely. He encourages fathers to be those present, loving, supportive figures in their daughters' lives, to treat them with respect, and to model those healthy boundaries and communication patterns in their own relationships.
It's about showing your daughters what a respectful, loving relationship looks like.
He believes that fathers have this incredible impact on their children's lives, shaping their beliefs, values, even their future relationships. And he urges fathers to approach that responsibility with real intention and purpose.
It's a powerful message to carry with us into the final part of our deep dive. We'll be back to explore what all of this means practically and how men can start applying these ideas to their own lives. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the relationship quake. We've covered a lot of ground, from vulnerability to societal shifts, the workplace, fatherhood. Now let's get practical. How can men take all these insights and actually apply them to their lives? Start making some positive changes.
Well, one thing Riker really stresses is taking ownership. Taking ownership of your life, your choices.
Yeah.
He says, stop blaming everything else, society, women, for your problems, and focus on what you can control. Your attitudes, your behaviors, your actions, that's what you have power over.
So like shifting from feeling like a victim to feeling empowered.
Exactly. He thinks that shift is crucial. It's essential for personal growth, for having a more fulfilling life. He's basically saying, step up, be the best version of yourself, no matter what obstacles you face.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's easy to feel like things are just happening to you, but we do have the power to choose our own path.
And along with that, he talks about setting goals, having something to aim for, whether it's in your career, relationships, personal life. It gives you direction, a sense of purpose. He thinks that's vital for men's well-being, helps with motivation and feeling fulfilled.
Right, having something to strive for, something that gets you excited to wake up each day and make the most of it.
He says, figure out what you're passionate about, what your values are, what your strengths are, then align your life with those things.
Find that sweet spot where your passions, skills, and values all come together.
And it's not just about these huge goals, it's about taking small steps every day consistently to get you closer to where you want to be.
Breaking it down, making it manageable, and celebrating those small wins along the way.
Now, one area Raker gets into that you don't always see in these kinds of books is style and grooming.
Oh, interesting. What's his take on that?
He says paying attention to your appearance isn't about vanity, it's about self-respect.
Okay.
It's about projecting confidence, competence.
Putting your best foot forward, showing you care about yourself.
Exactly. He thinks dressing well, taking care of your grooming, it can boost your self-esteem and change how others perceive you.
It's about presenting yourself in a way that reflects your values, your goals.
Yeah, and he emphasizes finding a style that's personal to you, something that makes you feel good.
So not just following trends, but figuring out what works for you, what makes you feel confident and authentic.
He encourages experimenting, investing in quality clothes, paying attention to fit, color, all those details.
Taking pride in your appearance.
Exactly. Now, back to the workplace for a moment. We talked about how it can be tricky for men to navigate a more, let's say, feminine environment.
Yeah, it can feel like you're walking on eggshells. Like, how assertive can you be? How masculine can you be without, crossing a line?
Riker gets that, and he gives some practical advice for men dealing with that. He says focus on developing your emotional intelligence, your communication skills.
So being able to read the room, understand those unspoken rules, communicate effectively but respectfully.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between assertiveness and empathy, being confident but not arrogant, leading without being domineering.
It's about expressing your masculinity in a way that's both genuine and appropriate for the setting.
He also suggests finding mentors and allies at work, people who can support you and guide you.
Yeah, having that network, people you trust, can make such a difference, especially when you're facing challenges or feeling lost.
Absolutely. And one last piece of advice from Riker that I think is so important, building strong relationships with other men.
Yeah, we've touched on that a few times, but I'd love to hear how he frames it in this final section.
He says those bonds are essential for men's emotional health. They offer that sense of camaraderie, support, belonging that so many men are missing.
It's about having that brotherhood, those guys you can always count on, who you can be yourself around, no judgment.
Yeah, and he encourages men to make time for those relationships. Prioritize spending time with your male friends. Be open and vulnerable with each other.
Creating those safe spaces where you can talk about anything, where you can really let your guard down.
And it's not just about hanging out, it's about being there for each other, offering advice, holding each other accountable, supporting each other through life's ups and downs.
Being there through thick and thin.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the relationship quake, I think it's important to remember this is just the start of the conversation.
This book has given us a lot to think about, and I hope it's encouraged you to take a closer look at your own life, your relationships, how you define masculinity for yourself.
It's a journey of self-discovery, of growth, and it's one we all have to take on our own.
But remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are resources out there, people who care about you. And there's a whole community of men going through the same thing.
Like Conrad Rikers says, the world needs good men, now more than ever.
So go out there, be the best man you can be kind, be courageous, be compassionate, be the change you want to see in the world.
And one final thought. Think about the men in your life who have inspired you, who embody the qualities you admire. What can you learn from them? How can you follow their example?
Until next time, keep exploring, keep diving deep, and keep striving to be the best version of yourself.